Hey, welcome back to the Guillemot Kayak Shop. I'm still working on bits and pieces of the microBootlegger Sport, so I'm working my way through things that I need to do while I still have access to the interior before joining the deck and hull together. So things like the cheek plates and mounting points for the back band. I also need to get started on things that'll happen after the deck and hull's together, so I have the seat that I need to work on a little bit. So I'm just going to peck away at this and that and hopefully talk a little bit about what I'm doing as I do it. So I didn't get back to peeling this tape off until several days later. I usually try and get it while the epoxy is still a little bit green, so we'll see how hard it is to get off of here. The epoxy did drip a little bit off the lower edge here. Just going to do a little bit to clean that up. And then the glass here is a little bit ragged from where I overlapped the edge. So again, try and blend that in a little bit. These little needle rasps, this is half round on one side, flat on the other. There's some big drips along this edge, just epoxy that rained down from the coaming. Just try and level those out. These Japanese rasps are different than your typical rasp. Compared to a typical European rasp, which has a bunch of little teeth, this has long blades and ends up leaving a very smooth finish. I really like these a lot. They work very well on the epoxy. Any drips, these cut right through them. The traditional European rasp works great too, but it's hard to find good quality European style rasps at a reasonable price. I'm being careful not to gouge into the carbon Kevlar here, so I'm not taking full strokes off this way. I'm trying to go down the length and then guide it with my fingers so it doesn't proceed out into the carbon Kevlar here and gouge into that. The goal here is to just make this feel smooth, so when somebody comes to pick up the kayak with their hand, it just feels nice to their hand. Just trying to get rid of any sharp edges and irregularities. I tend to clean up the area I'm working on by just blowing at it and just blowing the dust away. But really it's a good habit to develop to use a vacuum to clean it up. That way all that dust doesn't get thrown up into the air. It gets taken care of and disposed of. Again, I'm not always good at it, but that's probably the safest way to deal with it. So at this point, I'm just sanding away at various things here, just trying to clean them up. Again, make them smooth to the touch. I've got 80 grit on a soft sanding block. This is again that self-adhesive sandpaper, and just on a soft block that conforms a little bit, and try and smooth everything up. Here there's going to be a little bit of a ledge where the cloth used to attach the cheek plate to the boat wraps up onto the cheek plate, and same with down onto the coaming. It seems a little bit flexible, but it's very strong, and the back band will be attached through these holes here down right close to the fillet, and so that'll be plenty strong enough. Over here I've got a little bit of glass wrapped up from the cheek plate over onto the top of the coaming. I don't really need all of that there. I'd like to blend this in, so I'm going to use a rasp to get rid of at least most of it. Over on this side, it didn't wrap up quite as far, so I just have this little ragged edge to eliminate here. And the goal, again, of sanding all of this, make things feel good. So again, just grabbing hold of the coaming here just feels nice. Even safer than vacuuming up the dust after you've made it is to collect it while you're making it. This little sanding block from Mirka uses their Abranet sandpaper, which is fairly expensive, but it's got this porous, basically it's a woven material with the abrasive attached to that, and attach that to the sanding block, turn on the sander, and you collect the sanding dust as you're making it. They also have these foam adapter pads for working around contours. It reduces the effectiveness of the dust collection a little bit, but not too bad. And this now conforms better to shapes. I've got a couple partially completed seats here. I make these on my CNC machine, carve them out of a big block of wood, and end up with just a thin, essentially a tractor seat. I'm trying to decide which of these to use. With this one, there's already some epoxy on it, so I do not have the opportunity to stain this if I want to. This one is still raw, so I could stain it if I chose to. I could mask out the accent lines like I did on the deck and apply a coat of stain, and I think that could look quite sharp. This one, the grain here was a little short grained, and some of these pieces chipped off, but I think I could shape that down into a nice shape and make a good looking seat with that. This one is ready to have some fiberglass applied to it after sanding, and very lightweight. It's a nice seat. So the question comes down to, do I want to bring the outside color all the way in? That's approximately what it would look like with the raw cedar. And then I try to imagine this with some of the light red mahogany stain applied. You know, it'll still be a deep color. This is approximately the same base color for the cedar. This is darker because it has the epoxy on it that just deepens the color a bit. So this will be about the same color plus stain. And really I'm thinking, I kind of like the contrast of the natural brown to the stained red. I have brought the red in on the cheek plates here, and I think that would make a nice contrast to go with the contrast of the interior carbon Kevlar cloth. So you've got the sort of greenish carbon Kevlar cloth, the reddish of the deck, and then I think the natural color would really look pretty sharp right in here. That is my current line of reasoning. I'll need to make a backrest to match that. That'll get tied into the holes here and the pad eye I've attached in the back. So I'd need to make that to match this. So again, I think this is the way I'll go with this one. In order to get this ready for fiberglassing, I need to scuff up this epoxy so I have a good mechanical bond to that. I'm going to use these Klingspor sanding mops to sand the interior of the seats. They conform well to things. This is an 80 grit, and start with that, then move up to 120 grit and finer. This throws a lot of dust up in the air. Dust mask is a good idea. I wiped the seat down with a little denatured alcohol just to clean it up a little bit. And now I'm going to glass the bottom first. This will be a multi-step iteration to get this all glassed up. But bottom first, and I want to be able to let the cloth hang off the side. I don't want to have it down here and so we get bunches around the edges. So I'm just going to take one of my used epoxy mixing cups and tape it in place in here just so I can hold it up off the workbench. You'll have to balance that. Now I'm going to use a couple layers of S-glass to cover the bottom. And I'll arrange the S-glass so I can get it on the bias to the main axis of the shape, just for it to conform more easily to the contours. And I want 2 layers. One layer would probably be enough, but the second layer won't add too much weight and it'll add substantial strength. Again, this is where you sit, so it tends to have a lot of force on it. Most of the load forces on the boat are all generated through where you're sitting, and so try and make this good and strong. I'm going to not completely cut this to fit yet. I have a couple little places where the router had some missteps here and this chewed in there, so I'll just fill in this little divot there and then worry about getting the glass fitted after that's taken care of. So I've mixed up just a little bit of epoxy with sawdust in it, and we'll just take that and spread it in that little hole. All right, I've mixed up some more epoxy, and now I'll get some glass on here. And again, I've got the weave going this way and that way, so it'll be on a bias to most of the complicated shape. And then the hardest part is going to be down into the middle here and up the sides of the feet. So I'm going to start by wetting that out. So I'm just sort of tacking it in place initially, trying to get enough slack that it'll go around the contours. Once I've got a feel for where it's going, I'm going to cut it apart a little bit. By cutting off the excess here, I'm reducing how much the cloth has to distort. But I want to make sure I give enough excess that everything will be covered. I'm going to oversaturate this, and then when I put the next layer on, the excess resin can help wet out that layer from the underside out. All right, now I'm going to see if I can get the second layer of glass on without making too much of a mess. All right, I don't really want that overlap there, but too far into it. This shape's very hard to do the grunge cupping on because I've got the hollows and concave and convex sections. Everything's tight radius. So just using a paper towel here to sort of mop up the excess resin. Kind of a poor man's vacuum bagging. All right, leave that to cure. There's quite a bit of stress on this pad eye at times, holding up the back band. If you slide into the boat and push down on the back band, this is what's going to keep the back band from going all the way down to the floor. So having some glass on there, you know, that I made a lot of surface area on the foot of this pad eye to give it some good gluing, but the grain's going like this, so you could just split the top off, but you put one layer of 4-ounce glass on that, it's not going anywhere. Now a little bit of excess resin left over. This could use a fill coat to bury the weave of that initial cloth coat. So I'm glad to get the first layers of glass on the seat. That's a hard thing to wrap glass around. There's a lot of contours, it's going every which way. A lot of snipping and worrying about where the yarns are going so I don't get bridging. So between the seat and a little bit of work around the cockpit, I accomplished something. So I need to think about finishing the interior. It's going to have to get a scuff sanding and then the application of some sort of finish. So I'm not exactly sure what I'll get to on the next episode, but I'll think about it overnight and see where we end up. So until then, you can give me a like, subscribe, turn on notifications, all that good stuff. And if you're really into it, go over to Patreon, give me a little bit of support for producing these videos. So until the next episode, thanks for watching and happy paddling.